Hey guys, welcome to Stories with Rusty. Today on the podcast, we have David Kadavi, one of my favorite authors. In fact, it was his book called Design for Hackers that turned me into a designer. We talk about that. We talk about David's history, his career from going into the Silicon Valley to writing books, self publishing, and a lot of great stuff about how to be a writer, how to maneuver the world, how to take your creative process and show to the rest of the world. My favorite conversation in a while because of the person. David has helped me through his books become the person that I am today. And this long conversation, exactly like I had wanted it, is something that I'm sure you will enjoy if you understand or relate to the things that I am interested in. There might be some overlap. The only disclaimer I have is that the conversation is going to be in English. So there are timestamps in the description if you want to skip around throughout the conversation. And let's just begin.
The show. So
Either is fine. Either is fine.
if everybody's calling you Rusty, I suppose I should call you Rusty, huh?
Yeah, that is. I mean, it would be easier for you to pronounce either way. Vedant would get a little complicated. I think Rusty or Vedant either is
Vedant's
fine.
not that complicated. I don't think I've met a Vedant before.
Yeah, I hear that a lot because it's not that common of a name. At least not
It's
in the
not that
part of
complicated.
India where I am from. In the southern states, it's slightly more common to hear someone named Vedant, but not from where
Uh-huh.
I'm from.
All right.
Either ways, how are you, David?
Good. Just checking my lighting here.
That's
I've got just trying a new setup here, and I've got my webcam settings panel so I can adjust my camera and everything. And it looks all right.
I think it looks good.
Cool.
I think it looks good.
Yeah. I'm doing good. Yeah, it's raining a little bit. Hopefully that won't come through too much on the audio
I
here.
don't think it is coming through at all. Just a quick little disclaimer here though. I might look very sleepy, but that's only because it's 12:30 in the morning
Oh
over here.
man.
My normal
Yeah.
bedtime is around 10:30, 11, so it's a little past that, but I'm thoroughly excited for
Yeah.
this. Very
I
energized.
appreciate
I've been
you
looking forward for
you
this for a
staying
long
up this
time.
late.
No, but I
I
had to work
appreciate it.
around your convenience because I want to ask you so many questions. So my first one is obviously going to
I
be
have to be awake too.
how long do I have you here for so that I do not overstay my welcome?
What we got like oh okay, we
I
have
think
an
I blocked you
hour
for
on the
an hour.
thing. Okay. Well, I mean, I can do longer than that. Maybe I can do like up to an hour and a half, I think.
All right. So
Uh Now there is one thing that I'm running off batteries on my laptop. I kind of have to do that, and I have 81%, and there might be a point where I have to like
plug it
go
in.
turn on the outlet. But at that point, I'm sort of running on fumes mentally
That's all right. That's fine.
because it's weird. I'm sensitive to if my laptop's plugged in, I can't think as clearly. Which sounds nuts, but that's what
Why?
I've
Why
learned.
is that though? I mean, I'm sure there must be a reason.
It's this thing called EMF sensitivity that is controversial, probably because there's a lot of money to be made in electronics
Mm-hmm.
and but if you dig through the research, it's like no, you certainly can't say that this doesn't exist.
Mm.
So absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I'm one of these people who, unfortunately, the more time I spend on any sort of electronics, the less clear I can think.
Is that the reason why you use a typewriter to do your writing?
It's one of them. It's one of them. I don't think it's like the reason. I don't know what it would be like if I could just like when I was in my 20s or whatever, and I could just sit on my couch with a laptop literally on my lap and just spend an entire week redesigning my website or something.
Mm.
I don't know if I could still do that. If I think I would. I think I would still not. I think I would still probably use a typewriter.
So I have a little interesting story to share about me and typewriters.
Yeah.
So my grandfather, uh, in a small remote town sort of a place in India,
Mm-hmm.
used to run a typing institute, which is
Okay.
essentially a coaching center for teaching students and anyone who wants to learn typing how to type. So my father and all of my uncles, yes, all of them got great jobs only because they could type really well, probably faster
Yeah.
than anyone in the competition that was competing for the same job. So typing in our family is sort of like a generational, intergenerational
Oh,
talent that
cool.
all of the people in the family sort of sort of it's passed down throughout the generations. So I'm
Uh-huh.
gonna ask you one question: what is your typing speed at the moment? Like how many words per minute? If you've ever tested that.
I've never tested it on my typewriter.
Mm-hmm.
I think last I tested it on my computer, it was like 80 words
Oh,
a
that's good.
minute.
That's good.
It
So
wasn't fantastic. I would suspect that it's a little faster. I've noticed lately that I think I type a little faster than I used to,
hmm.
probably in part because I type on the typewriter and I've strengthened my fingers
Hmm.
so much. But there's a typewriter documentary called California Typewriter,
Hmm.
and in that documentary uh, they visit India,
Hmm.
and I don't recall like the exact details, but I think there was a company in India that was still making typewriters, or they recently closed, or they're
Hmm.
still open. I don't actually remember.
That's all right.
But yeah, they were showing how there were like people on the streets who would just type up documents for you.
Oh yeah, that is
Um,
still a thing that happens. I
okay,
think that is a thing that happens in the courts over here, because
yeah.
there's a lot of clerical work that goes around, and you have all of these people sitting outside the courts because people do not show up with their documents ready. So oftentimes you have to go to certain people sitting outside. They might be lawyers, they might be people who are trying to be lawyers, and then they type up
Mm-hmm.
stuff for them on their behalf.
Sometimes that's actually just the easiest way to get something on paper.
Mm-hmm.
The place that I bought my typewriter from, the green one behind me, uh, which is called Phoenix Typewriter, that guy's main clientele
Mm-hmm.
is corporate clients who use the IBM Selectric.
Mm-hmm.
And the IBM Selectric is like a little golf ball that has letters all over it.
Oh yeah.
And he repairs those, and those are corporate clients that pay the most or whatever. And then he kind of repairs these typewriters, and I'm sure it amounts to like $5 an hour with like the profit that he probably not even that, who knows, with the profit he makes selling these typewriters and stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of businesses still in operation that they've got forms they need to fill out, and to get a printer on a computer to do it for them
I
is
mean,
just not that practical.
I
You
don't
just
think I
might as
don't
well just
think
have the typewriter.
I don't think printers are as common as people think they are, because a couple of I think a week back I wanted to get some documents printed for a visa application that I was filling out,
Yeah.
and I went out to get those documents at 8 in the night, and I could barely find any computer cyber cafe. It's kind of a thing that we have here, which could
Mm-hmm.
print them for me. It took me a couple of hours to actually find someone who would, on an urgent basis, print those out for me. But again, I could not have typed those out anyway.
Well, I mean, I think that we were all excited when printers first got decent, and there
Hmm.
was like inkjet printers and laser printers and stuff. But then once you owned one for a while, you were like, this is terrible. Notice Apple never made a
Oh yeah,
printer because they're impossible.
yeah, they're impossible
And
to handle, the manage.
I haven't had a printer for years, and many people probably haven't had printers for years. And actually, so yeah, here's some typewritten pages right here of what the thing I was drafting, and I live in Colombia, and there's still a lot of things done on paper, so I have quite a bit of scrap paper that's just
Oh yeah, I did
invoices
read
or
your
something.
tweet in the morning today. I mean, it wasn't
Yeah,
from
yeah.
you.
So I have actually quite a bit of scrap paper
Hmm.
that I don't even have to buy paper, because there's all this paper that's out there. It's just one side's not being used, and you write something down, then you can take your highlighter out and you can read it, you can highlight it, and you walk around and pace around with it. I mean, it's really wonderful.
But
And
walk me
yeah,
through this process if you can, because if I were to
yeah.
today switch to writing on a typewriter, I
Hmm.
definitely would not be able to do that. For example, I just bought this new keyboard in the morning today, And
Oh,
that's
cool.
because it reminds me the most of the typewriter that I used to type on when I was a young
Yeah, yeah.
kid. So this is the closest I would probably be able to come back to a typewriter. But for you, I think it has become sort of a habit now that you write on a typewriter, if I'm not wrong. So could you
I
walk
mean,
me through that
it's a
process?
more than a habit. It's just it's becoming a key part of my creative process. Really, is a I've done this now for the last several weeks. I'm experimenting with kind of device free Mondays,
Mm-hmm.
where my entire day I have some rules for myself. Uh, I don't use my computer. I will use my phone to look things up at certain points in the day. Um, but my phone, I don't have any social media apps on it, and I've blocked Instagram and Twitter using the parental controls.
Mm.
And on the parental controls, you can allow, you have to use this feature called limit adult websites. And so you can allow adult websites on there on the filter. So if anybody who wants to use this,
Mm.
don't get scared away by the fact that it says limit adult websites. You can still say like, put
Yeah.
whatever ones you want to visit
Mm.
on there. Not that I mean, whatever. I don't. Anyway, but so it says no Twitter, no Instagram, because I had deleted the apps for those, but I could still visit on my
Browser.
browser, and I
Yeah.
started doing that. And so, but now my phone is just dumb. Like it
Mm.
just can't. All I can access on it is I can look up things on the web, and I can access my notes and stuff. So
Mm.
that's the only device that I'll use on these device-free Mondays. But it starts with sit down. I've got a kind of like an overbed table, like you might see in a hospital, that
Mm.
goes over my recliner, and I take the typewriter and I put that on there, and I just put it in a piece of paper, and I'll start writing. And I also have, it really depends on what I'm thinking about and
Mm.
how I'm going to engage with what I'm thinking about,
Mm.
because I also have whiteboards. Got a couple different whiteboards, and that are just 9 by 12 sort of tablets, and I'll sort of switch around between amongst those. I will take out the Alpha Smart. I don't consider that a device,
Mm.
and I will type on that. And it really just depends on what am I thinking about, and it starts with that.
Mm.
In the morning, what am I thinking about? And couple Mondays ago, the thing I was thinking about was this fiction project that I've been dabbling in. And I went ahead and just took out some note cards, index cards, and wrote sort of beats of the story on that using my typewriter. And so the process is very messy. It just so happens that writing in the typewriter can be a good part of it, because I think writing on the typewriter is good for when I want to do like a brain dump and I want to review it. Because one of the great things about writing on the typewriter is that you can't fool yourself. This is a first draft. There's nothing that you can do that will cause this thing to be published, other than say taking a picture of it and posting on Instagram, which is just. And even optical character recognition. Interestingly, the iPhone has optical character recognition built in now, or iOS does, and it doesn't even work with the typewriter, which is weird because
Oh, I had no clue
it's
that was the case.
perfectly mechanically, reproduced, but it still can't read those letters for some reason. So there's nothing I can do that will cause me to that will allow me to publish what I'm writing. And so that takes all the pressure off. There's no worry about, am I getting the sentence structure right? If I suddenly think about another thing halfway through what I'm writing, I can just start writing a different thing. And so I'll write a couple pages. Usually I end up writing a couple pages about something, an idea. And then, maybe I'll review it. And if I review it, I might highlight some of the good parts. And so Um, and so what I'll do then is take some of the parts that maybe are good, and maybe I'll take my phone and I'll put in drafts. There might be a couple things that where I say to myself, "Oh, this would make a good tweet."
Okay.
And at that point, I might say, "Well, I want to work on that tweet a little bit." And so I'll grab my Alpha Smart, and the Alpha Smart counts characters. There's a character count on there. And so maybe I'll work through the tweet a little bit of like, is that the right word? What are the other words I could use? And that's something I might work on my whiteboard. Is okay, you know, let's say if you're lucky enough, here's one thing I highlighted. If you're lucky enough or hard enough on yourself to suffer through finishing a few dozen times, meaning going through a process of finishing a project, despite having attempted the process in the most painful way possible. Okay, that's the part I highlighted, but I think I'm saying that, like, if you expect to be able to sit down and record and mix a perfectly well thought out song, that's going to be frustrating when you have the totally normal experience of it not turning out as you had pictured. And I go through a number of different fields where if you expect it to come out perfectly the first time that you do it, you're going to be disappointed. And so I started thinking, well, how can I turn that thought into a tweet? And that's where I will go through, just work on the word order and which exact words am I going to do, and will it fit into 280 characters? And then I'll, if I come up with something that I think is all right, when I finally do allow myself to touch my phone, which might be a few hours into the day, I'll open up drafts and I'll put that in my sort of tweets scratch file, which is where I put my tweets. And then I have a rule for myself that I won't tweet anything in less than 24 hours in advance. So I have to
Why is that?
I have to schedule it. And the reason that I do that is because if I go and I tweet first of all, if I just think of the thing and I go and tweet it, I'm not going to write it as well as I could. I won't get it right. Maybe I would get awkward wording, and I haven't thought precisely about what is it that I'm exactly trying to say, and what's the best way to say it. And so that filter, for one, helps with that, is that I have this process of working through a thought and turning it into a tweet. That's one reason. But then the other reason is that if I do tweet something that I just thought of, or even that I copied and pasted from my scratch file, then I'm going to instantly be obsessed with, is this getting any engagement? What does this look like?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so by making this simple rule of I only publish something 24 hours in advance, schedule something 24 hours in advance, only Monday through Friday, only these times, then by the time it's tweeted, I've forgotten about
so you don't have to worry about the kind of engagement it is getting on the platform.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about paying that extra bit of cognitive load that doesn't actually help, other than perhaps maybe an algorithmic boost from Twitter, because I think they like it when you're using Twitter a lot.
Of course they do. But that is so interesting to see, because my experience with Twitter personally, and so I have a similar process, not exactly the same.
Oh, cool.
But I would often, if there's a thought that strikes that I think it's good enough to tweet, or let's say good enough to put on a LinkedIn post, etc., I would just post it on the Twitter drafts, not on a separate scratch sheet. And whenever I'm feeling in the moment like I want to tweet something, I would just scroll through the drafts, maybe edit them a bit, and then publish those. So it's a similar process to not tweet something which is very instant, which is just at the top of your head. The
Sometimes
interesting
that's what I'm doing when I'm not as disciplined as I am at this particular point in time. Yes.
the interesting thing though is that I've noticed that oftentimes when you think and reword or try and make sure that what you're trying to convey is exactly what you are writing, those tweets or nobody pays attention to them, but all of those brain fart moments that you just
Yeah.
put out tend to do really well. What is your thought, or let's say, how do you make sense of any of those things?
It is odd because sometimes for myself and even more very often for others, I'll read a tweet that's doing really well and I'll say, but they mixed metaphors that doesn't even make sense, and I guess that it's sort of immediacy can help. And I do sometimes try not, don't want to write it into the ground. This is something Maya Angelou talked about. I will not write this into the ground. And I think a lot of times, or actually this exercise of, say, going through and analyzing every single word of this tweet and making sure that you're saying exactly what you want to say, exactly how you're going to say it with the best economy possible, and perhaps with some rhetorical structure that makes it interesting, etc. That exercise, I don't think of it as an exercise to improve this tweet necessarily. I think of it as I'm doing it with this tweet, and then in the future, it just naturally comes to me, and it becomes easier to be more precise with the language that I'm using. And I have found that to be true when I look back at my old stuff that was a lot more impulsive. I say, oh, that was just you said that all wrong. You should have said it this way. But it's still a mystery to me. I still Twitter still continues to frustrate me.
But I mean, from what I can make out from as an outsider, as a viewer, I don't think Twitter would even play as much of a role in what you're actually striving out to do, which is write good books that actually help people or people read or are interesting to people. I mean, Twitter is a way for you to get to that potential audience, but I don't think I don't think Twitter should play that much of a heed in your cognitive load. I would believe so.
I mean, yes and no. I use it as a testing bed for ideas where if I see a tweet doing well, or if I just like it, even if it's not doing well, I have a system set up where I will like my own tweet. And maybe that's one reason the Twitter algorithm hates me so much is because
you like your own tweets.
Because I like my own tweets. But I like my own, when I like my own tweet, that sets off a Zapier zap. And that then triggers it to save the tweet and the data associated with it into an Airtable spreadsheet. So I have an entire database of all my best and favorite tweets, and that is what I use then to create my Love Mondays newsletters. So each month, as I create a batch of Love Mondays newsletters, I look through at the tweets, and I can sort by number of likes. I can sort by how new they are. I can sort by whether I've published it or something about it already or not. And then I get these ideas that, I would like to expand upon. That did really well. I'd like to expand upon it. Or I just really like that and people didn't seem to get it, but maybe if I expand upon it, I can get that to work. And so that's one way that I develop my newsletters. And then sometimes what works as a tweet becomes a newsletter and then becomes a longer article for my podcast. It seems like more often than not, the podcast articles, I write those and then tweets come from those, where you just have a passage where you say, oh, that would be a good tweet. Now, so that's one way that it does inform my, say, book writing process, is it helps me work through ideas and get a feel, sort of workshopping ideas like you were doing an open mic as a comedian or something. Yes. And then the other way is that, at least with Mind Management, Not Time Management, was the first book where I kind of went through and found different areas where there was a chance to say some kind of a sticky aphorism or thing that would be memorable. to people. And that became an opportunity for me to pull out that part and say, well, let's work with this. Let's see what would this be like if it was a tweet. And it's interesting how just asking yourself that question completely changes what you're writing.
It
When
does.
when it's going to be a tweet, yeah, suddenly it's a different thing. So, and in doing that, I found some things that really resonated well. And then I would take the tweet that did well, and I would just like put that passage exactly as I wrote as the tweet in the book. And then, now the book has been out for almost a couple of years now. If you go look at the most popular highlights on Kindle, guess what are the most popular highlights?
Oh, I can get that.
Right? And and I haven't heard them talk about this, but if you watch, let's just take two giants of self-help authors, James Clear, Mark Manson. If you watch them, and I don't know what sort of secret meetings they're having. I've talked to both of them a little bit, but we're not like buddies or something. Yeah. But you could see them doing this, where the newsletter that Mark Manson shares, there's these passages that, he tweeted that last week, or it goes in reverse.
Yeah.
And then, or you look in where it goes into the book, James Clear's book. He's like the master of these short, pithy little metaphors or examples or sort of imagery as words that seem to just really stick with people. And that's because he's really great at Twitter. Yes. And he thinks about the tiny, it's atomic.
I think it's very important to have that in your arsenal as a writer or an author. There's another writer that I've been following on Twitter for a while called Julian Shapiro, if I'm not wrong. And he does that a lot. His tweets, he converts them into articles, and those articles then feed his Twitter. So it's an interesting process. In fact, for me, when I started out using Twitter, I think it's a great tool. When I started out using Twitter, I made it a point to tweet before every meal that I have, just so I could build a habit of tweeting and writing a thought. So whatever thought is in my head, I would make sure that I articulate it in the best way possible, and then tweet it, and then sit down and go have my meal. So that just helped me build an audience and a habit of using Twitter. I think across my first year, I made around 1,000 tweets on a routine, 3 to 4 tweets every day. And that helped me do fairly well on Twitter and build a writing habit. I think it's a great way for you to, any new person to build out a writing habit. But okay, I think it's been long enough that I haven't officially given any context to why we are having this conversation in this podcast. So I tend to do that. I tend to get into the conversation right away and then forget about giving some context for the listeners. So David, I think I came across your first book all the way back in 2017. I was fresh out of college and I just joined a startup where I was heading design, marketing and content. And I had, I would say, barely any clue about design. And one of my colleagues then recommended me this book called Design for Hackers. And I liked the name and I thought, for sure, I would go and buy it off of Amazon. I went on to Amazon. It was around 3,000 to 4,000 rupees, which I would assume is somewhere around 50, 60 odd dollars, I think. Yes. And I did not have any money. At that moment, I went out to every possible website I could think of that could hold a PDF. I happened to find one. I think I still have that pirated PDF. So apologies.
I think there's a lot.
I mean, that is one. So I have another author friend of mine who's also a YouTuber. And he judges the success of his book by the number of times he has seen it pirated on the streets of Delhi. So he says if your book is getting pirated, then it's surely a good book. So that book, for a lot of reasons, has resonated with me because I think it was the foundation block for me to get into my own journey of understanding design in a very different way. So I have no background in understanding or studying design. I've come from studying literature in my undergrad. So design doesn't have any correlation with that. But when I landed a job which had a core aspect of it at design, I think I had to build that skill, and then I happened to come across your book, and ever since I've been a great admirer of your writing.
Oh, cool.
So this is sort of a very how do I put it? It's a selfish reason that I'm having this conversation with you because I am
It should be.
because I am currently in the process of writing a book of my own. I have already published a poetry anthology a few years back, but now I'm fully invested in writing a book of my own. So all my intention is to get a few hacks, not hacks necessarily, but a few, let's say, foundations or processes, because I can sense
Yeah.
that you have a lot of processes and systems in place that help you get your thoughts in order and put them down on paper and then eventually into a book. So that is what
Cool.
essentially I'm here for, and I'm thankful to you for taking out the time. So that, I think, where we can start is this first question that I have is, why the need for having so many systems in place? Because I'll give you some context.
Yeah.
When I write, I just take out whatever device I have. It can be my phone, it can be my tablet, it can be my laptop, it can be this computer that I have here. And I have a connected system of Google Docs and, no, not Google Docs, Word documents, because I'm a dedicated MS Word user. So I use those and I just continue to write on them, whatever device I could have. I
Yeah.
had a Windows phone for the longest time possible. Once they ran out of support, I was still using MS Word on those phones. So that is my writing process. I don't know if you will call that a process. It's just whenever words come into your head, write them down. How
Hmm.
is it that you have happened to manage to, or felt the need to, establish systems in place to have your
Yeah.
writing process sorted?
So that's the way that you write even with poetry and more
Yes.
artistic stuff?
Yes. So it's mostly that with poetry. So I use this beautiful app called Bear. It's
Okay, yeah,
beautiful.
bear.
So
Yeah.
I use Bear, and I literally have a hashtag tag called Midnight Musings. So my
Mm-hmm.
poetry, I write it at midnight whenever I'm just lying in bed or watching television, and a certain idea or a thought strikes, and I just write it down. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, with all of my writing, I do it this way, except when it is a script for a YouTube video. Then I have
Mm-hmm.
to do some research, and that's a different process. But anything creative that is coming out of the top of my head, it goes this way. The upside to that, though, is that once I revisit that, let's say a month or a couple of weeks down the line, it often gets difficult to believe that, all right, these are the words that I have written. So that is always very joyful to feel, if even if they're bad words, because it gets sometimes difficult to process that, okay, these are the words that have come out of my mind, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Huh. I don't know if I've articulated this totally. I would like to. How have I even arrived at having systems for writing?
Hmm.
Well, um, I'm not natively a writer,
Mm-hmm.
like I think you are. If you studied
Literature,
literature
yes.
in college,
And school,
um,
since class
I
grade third.
yeah, I actually not only did not like writing, I actively disliked writing when I was growing up.
Why is that?
I really hated it. I probably because of the way that it was taught to me in school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this idea of write an outline and then write the thing that you're going to write. And I always found that very confusing.
Mm.
I always felt like, well, how am I going to write the outline if I haven't written the thing?
Yeah. The great
And
writing
I
paradox.
think, and some people really, they can do that. They can write the outline and then write the thing. And I
Yeah,
can do
I
that
don't I don't
more
get
as,
that either. I don't get that either. How can
okay,
you do
yeah,
that?
I can do it more as I get to know someone. Or on top of it, write this, write about this topic that you know nothing about. I remember even in college, I remember showing up to an English composition class, and they said, "Oh, write an essay about Vietnam." Well, I wasn't alive then. I don't know anything about Vietnam. I'm
Mm.
sure it would be, especially at that point in my life. It's not like it's something that, or sorry, when I say Vietnam, that's a very Amerocentric way of saying Vietnam. But they said Vietnam, they mean the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and I didn't know anything about that. Not that it's not something valuable to learn about, but now you've given me two tasks. One is to write uh, an essay, and the other is to learn about the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
and maybe three. The third being to make yourself interested in the Vietnam War, which is its own task, I think. Yeah, it is. And I dropped out of that class, and then
Understandably.
that summer in my hometown, I tried to make it up at the local university, and that teacher said, hey, just write about your best friend, or write things that you know. Like, we're going to write things that you know for these. So your first assignment is write about a pet or a best friend or something like that. So I wrote about my dog, and it was super easy, and I was able to write, and I did well in that class, and I started to enjoy writing probably for the first time. Wow, gosh. And then I started a blog as a professional web designer because I lived in Nebraska and was reading a lot of blogs, and I wanted to sort of reach out into this exciting ether that was out there, having grown up in a pretty isolated place. And I wanted to engage, I think, with all the great blogs that I was seeing out there from people who were probably mostly in Silicon Valley. And then I got a job in Silicon Valley, thanks in part to that blog. And yada, 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 I got a book deal to write Design for Hackers. And then that was extremely painful. And I was surprised how difficult it was because I was a designer. So I was well versed in this idea of the creative process of being sort of in agony as you're immersing yourself in a problem space and trying to come up with the creative solution for it. So I suffered through it. But once I was done, I thought, well, that was really tough. Why? And I started to look at the neuroscience and psychology behind creativity. And I started to see patterns in sort of the way that I had managed to get myself to write that book. And I saw that a lot of that matched up with what was already known or had been known for a long time in these sciences. And that's where the idea of mind management, not time management, my latest book, came from. And along that process, I have developed systems for writing because it's just the easiest way for me to engage with the ideas that are in my brain. There's this great video of Steve Jobs from the 80s, I think, and he's talking about the personal computer, and he's talking about how it's the bicycle for the mind. And I love that analogy. How can you make your use of a technology, any technology, like a bicycle for the mind? Like, it's not a car for the mind. It's not a bumper car for the mind, like it often is these days. But actually a bicycle for the mind. It is pure contact between your effort and the landscape that you're navigating. And so that's where these systems come from, I think, is because sometimes I can't get a grip or I can't get traction on what I'm doing, or I don't know where I'm going and I need the map, right? So I have these things in my business that I create because they help me be the person that I want to be. So I want to be somebody who's thinking about ideas. I want to be somebody who's reading books. I want to be somebody who's having interesting conversations, connecting with interesting people. And I would do a little bit of that. That's kind of naturally what I'm going to do if I'm left to my own devices. But I want to do a little bit more than I would naturally do. And so I have myself creating things. And I want to do those things a little bit better than I would do them if I was just doing them on my own. And so that's why I have Love Mondays newsletters that come out every week. That's why I release a pretty detailed article every couple of months. That's why for a while there I was interviewing a lot of really interesting people on my podcast, people like Seth Godin or Dan Ariely. And so when you have those things happening on a schedule, you realize, well, I need to get to a certain point to be comfortable with with creating on that schedule. And one of the things that I noticed as I looked at the psychology and neuroscience behind creativity was the incubation is an extremely underrated and underutilized part of the creative process.
Can you
We
elaborate a bit on
know,
that?
yeah, we know, uh, just in our culturally,
Hmm.
that you should sleep on a problem. You should sleep on it.
Hmm.
In I live in Colombia. In Spanish, it's called consultar la almohada. Consult your pillow. Is there something in India?
I
Is there a
don't
different expression?
I don't think there is, but the sentiment is here that if you sleep on a problem, you'll wake up with a solution. That sentiment does transcend across cultures, yes.
Yeah, or if you're gonna make a big decision, like you
Yeah.
buy a house or get married or something like that,
Hmm.
that you're not gonna make the decision right away, right?
Yeah. I think we
You're
call
gonna
it
sleep.
we'll tackle it in the morning. That is what we call it,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, right. Right. You're gonna sleep on it. So
Yeah.
we know that, but how often do we don't seem to utilize that intentionally very much
Hmm.
in our creative work. And so that's one of the things that I've discovered and that I make good use of is this engaging with an idea just enough to get the wheels turning
Hmm.
and then disengaging with it. But having a system makes it a lot easier to remind yourself to re-engage
Hmm.
with 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 that idea. And so it's not like you forget the idea totally. You remember it as soon as you pick up the paper that you've typed or something. And there is a little bit of value to forgetting an idea and seeing if it comes back to you.
Hmm.
But by creating systems, I'm able to do that in what I see as like a really efficient way that makes me feel at peace and makes me feel like I don't have ideas that are falling through the cracks. And also that it gives me an opportunity to do a much better job at developing those ideas than I would if I just tried to power myself through it, which was
Hmm.
what I did in writing my first book, which, hey, that worked out. It did well. But, if I could rewrite the book today, it would probably be better because I have better work habits and I'm probably a better writer in some ways. In other ways, I probably was a better writer then, I guess. Um, but yeah, so I think that's how I arrived at using systems for creative things.
So would I be wrong if I suggest that you you write to solve the problems that you want to tackle? So writing is sort of a way for you to make sense of how you would potentially approach whatever problems is it that you want to solve.
Yeah, I think that there's sort of two postures that you can take
Hmm.
as a writer.
Hmm.
I think you can be the expert or you can be the angel.
Hmm. Oh, that's very
And
interesting.
when you're the expert, it's because you really know a lot about something,
Hmm.
and you're just going to share the thing that you learned.
Hmm.
And I think that's the point at which maybe writing an outline is easy. I could write an outline about how I would write an article on how to tie your shoes, for example.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm an expert at tying shoes. Been doing it for 43 years, but maybe not that long. But I've been doing it for a long time. I've been
Yeah.
tying shoes. I'm an expert tying shoes. Actually, have a pretty special way that I tie shoes. You can find a YouTube video from somebody else on it. But anyway, but the angel
Hmm.
is what is an angel? An angel is somebody who they've been through it. They've been through the same thing, and now they're going to guide you.
Hmm.
I think that's what the idea is of like say a guardian angel or something. I think it might be a Christian idea. I don't know.
Maybe
I think yeah.
the
I don't know if
the
that exists in
sentiment.
other cultures.
I mean, not exactly doesn't translate that well if it is not Christian, but I do get the sentiment. I think what you
Yeah.
are trying to, let's say, essentially convey, if I'm getting it right, is that you can either be an expert where you know everything, and or you can be a person who is trying to explore and maybe figure out potential solutions, which is not.
Well, I think of it as like an angel is like you've just been through it.
Mm. So it is
You've just learned it, and so you remember what it was like to not know the thing.
okay.
Whereas the experts, there's this idea of the expert's curse, that
Mm.
once you know something so well, you no longer really you can't really explain it to somebody because you don't know what it's like to not know that thing. And so I think I write I try to write more like the Angel style. And that is writing these things it's what I'm struggling with myself. I've got this Getting Art Done series. I've got The Heart to Start and Mind Management, Not Time Management. I'm working on another one. And these are all like things that I have struggled with or am currently struggling with and I'm trying to figure out in some ways so I can just formalize to myself what's my process for this. It's a system again. It's sort of like creating the operating system for how to that will most efficiently create things. Creating the mental operating system for that. Trying to put that in the world.
I think the best of the writers are very aware of the self-exploratory nature of their writing. And I think that is something that you are also, let's say, attempting to do with your work as well. I think it's a great way to write. So, okay, here is a problem statement that I have for my book that I'm writing. So I've got an idea.
Okay.
I've got an outline which I have sort of come up with after discussion with a lot of people who are, let's say, experts in the thing that I want to write about. And now there's an outline. And now I do not know how to proceed further because I have absolutely no clue how to write on an outline. How would you potentially solve a problem like that if you were to be stuck in something like this?
You have the outline, you don't know how to proceed further.
Let's say I have 5 parts within the book that I want to fill now with stories and context and data, etc., etc., etc.
So the kind of way my process goes is I still outline, but I almost never finish an outline. Because as I'm outlining, what I'm usually doing is I'm just trying to write like a 1-sentence statement of what the chapter or something is going to say. So actually, for right now, I'm working. I can think of the book that I'm writing right now. I could say that like finishing and follow through is really important. Okay, that's the introduction to the book, and under that would be I'll get back to that. Okay, finishing is really important. Okay, and then another one would be our cultural understanding of finishing or follow through is outdated and is not fit for the creative work that we need to be doing in our world. And so there would be a number of statements like that. Now let's go back to that first one. Finishing is really important. And then I would make a sub bullet on that one. And I would say, well, I need to think of an example here. I might actually type this out in brackets because that helps. That's just my permission to suck signal.
Nice.
Is just write brackets.
Yeah.
So I think, I need to think of an example of this. Well, who's somebody who like didn't ship something that they should have? Oh, how about Leonardo da Vinci? And I could say, well, yeah, Leonardo da Vinci, he didn't try to make all these different treatises that would have put these different sciences ahead hundreds of years, and he never published any of them. And one of them that he didn't publish was his drawing of this piece of the human heart in the aorta, and it ended up being called the sinuses of Valsalva because a couple hundred years later, some other guy named Antonio Valsalva like found this area that Leonardo da Vinci had already described. And then also the things that Leonardo da Vinci described about how it actually works, they only recently confirmed that using magnetic resonance imaging. And actually one of the papers that first did that was in the 60s. And so anyway,
Oh no, it's I can.
I'm getting stuck in that story. So actually, you can see then what's happening there is now I'm getting stuck in that story, and I've forgotten about the outline, and I'm going through the outline over and over again, trying to find those areas where I'm just hit a vein, and like it's just all going to come bursting and blooding out, and then you can only write so much in a session, and I end up with that, and so I will then say, okay, I hit something here, and I'll just start writing that chapter, or I'll start writing that section. And then what will happen is I'll be writing that, and oftentimes what will happen is as I'm writing a section out realize I'm trying to describe too many concepts at once. I'm like, well, it's important to recognize. I wonder if I can even do this for this finishing idea is that, well, Leonardo da Vinci, it would have been great if he could have shipped these things. But then again, there are different cognitive styles, and he kind of had a cognitive style that was a little bit more of a perceiver versus a judger. He was a little bit lower on psychological need for closure. There's this David Galenson idea of there are experimental creators or there are conceptual creators, and he was definitely more of an experimental. And maybe he wasn't actually capable of being any different. And also, by the way, Raphael basically stole everything that Leonardo learned, and he just was able to apply it because he was a much better executor and much better with people, etc. And like, okay, I've like lost the thrust of what I'm trying to, what my point is, right? And so that's where as I write about that thing, I'll come back. Then I have to revisit the outline because I have to say, well, now one thing at a time. Okay, it's important. Leonardo da Vinci. The world would be better off if Leonardo da Vinci would have published his things. Now, maybe later I go on to talk about, well, there's actually different cognitive styles, and I will start talking about Leonardo da Vinci, and then I'm going to stop. And then I'm going to have to talk about these other things. And then I'm going to jump back into it so I can talk about this concept of there being different cognitive styles, etc. And so it's this iterative process that is over and over and over again. And that's one of the things that I do with that No Device Monday that I talk about. Is one of my rules is I can't consume any media except for my own. And so that might be like I go in my folder of different things that I've written, and I'll like reread some of the stuff, and I'll say, like, oh, actually, this is good. What happened to that? How come I never used that? Or I'll re-listen to episodes of my podcast, which is basically the way that I develop my books is write a podcast article about this idea, then this idea, then this idea, then this idea. And as I re-listen to it, I think, oh, it'd be so much better if I did that. And oh, by the way, I can't believe I completely missed how that connects to this other thing. And so I'm re-engaging with that stuff. And it's this iterative process of I'm digging the clay out of the ground, I'm pounding it on the table, I'm smashing it into shape, and then maybe I'm doing that again and kneading it, and then eventually I'm going to get into the details, but I have to keep adding things and polishing it over and over again before it's finally going to make any sense.
So I think it's essentially, like you said, a reiterative process of getting all of the thoughts in your head that might even be tangentially connected to each other or not connected to each other at all.
Yes.
And then having them out. I think the most important aspect that I am getting here is having them out on a piece of tangible physical paper that allows you to, let's say, how I would, let's say, approach it would be have 10 different articles or 10 different documents or one document where I would use a Control+F and find a page. But if I have a bunch of, like you have a bunch of physical articles that are out there that you can then physically touch, I think that aspect is really important, at least to your process.
Yeah. So one thing I did the other day was I got an outline that I righted an outline finally that I was reasonably satisfied with for the next book that I'm working on. And it included, I realized, okay, here's all the different podcast articles. Oh, this outline, that could be this podcast article, that can be this podcast article, etc. And then I went and just collected all my podcast articles and I put them in that order, and I went and I printed it out. And now I'm going to have, like, on one side, they're not, this is going to be typewriter paper for me in the future. And so I can go to a cafe and I can sit down and I can read these. And even though they don't fit together and interlock together and a lot of the things that I wrote, I didn't even realize at the time how it would fit. And, the final book isn't going to be just all things that I've already written. Yeah, definitely not. But this gives me something tangible then I'll sit down and read, and I'll get through several chapters, and then I'll realize I'll get excited about one thing and make a note to, I'm going to work on that part tomorrow, or maybe I even take out my whiteboard right then and there and I just write a statement about the basic overarching argument that I'm trying to make that I haven't made in these things that will help connect and stitch those things together.
Very interesting. So I have another question that is sort of tied into this. Do you write by yourself alone, or do you have, let's say, how I would put it as a writing room where you sit with people that resonate with the ideas that you have, and then you bounce off ideas off of them? Is that part of us? Is the system? Is there a system that exists of this sort, or what is it that like for you?
No, I write alone.
Mm.
Almost everything, yeah, almost all my writing I do alone. When I can get some people together for dinner or something,
Mm.
people who are interested in hearing what I have to say on these things, um, then that can be a time for me where I do switch on to where I'm deliberately trying to pitch ideas.
Mm.
Not in like I try to not do it in an annoying way, but like maybe I'll mention a thing. Oh, Raphael uh, just stole all the stuff from Leonardo.
Yeah.
And if somebody's like, what?
Then you know.
Well, I
All
just
right, they're
like, and I
interested.
just like, I'm watching,
Mm.
and I'm watching their face,
Mm.
and this was actually a trick that Robert McKee, the screenwriting instructor, talks about in Story, is don't just like suffer your way through writing a screenplay.
Yeah.
Write your basic step outline, work on your basic step outline, invite a friend to coffee,
Mm.
and tell them the story that you're working on. And do they look interested? Are their eyes getting wide? Are they like on the edge of their seat? Do they want to know more? Or are they just sort of looking at you blank face like, oh, that's a neat idea? But you want to hope that you can find friends who will tell you the truth.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the only extent to which other people are involved is where I might
Mm.
tell people, and I'm often deliberate about
Mm.
what's the more interesting way to say this, or
Mm.
what are the right steps in this story. And sometimes it's fun to do where I'll explain to my partner, and she doesn't speak English, so then I've got to like translate it into
Oh,
Spanish and
that would be a fun
describe
exercise.
an idea. And I think that helps solidify the information a little bit better, as well as also kind of like, can I express this in that what's not my first language? Um,
Mm.
yeah.
I think it's also, I mean, it's a very interesting point that you bring up, which is that it is important to know multiple languages. I mean, I'm assuming that you know at least two, so that you can then translate and convey ideas into different languages. For example, I speak Hindi and English and understand a bit of Punjabi. So when I
Hmm.
have to translate an idea and a thought that is natively in Hindi, and I've been speaking English all through my schooling and my college, and I was out in the UK for my masters, it's sort of a filtration process of sorts that goes through. That this is a thought. Now you have to
Mm-hmm.
convey it in a different language, and you have to be very cautious about the words that you're using, because
Mm-hmm.
a sentiment might mean something very different in my native language, and if I translate it literally, it might mean something very different. So this contextual awareness of what words you're using, I think it solidifies your process as a
Yeah.
writer.
I don't know if it's necessary or not,
Mm.
or even how important it is,
I
but
think it's an
I like what
advantage.
I like what I get out of it.
Mm.
I mean it's fascinating
Mm.
because you come across a lot of things where you suddenly realize you're trying to explain something, and you've got like this expression that you didn't even know was an expression
Mm.
in your native language, and you're trying to describe it to this other person, and you realize, oh, they don't have an expression. I wish I could think of a great example right now. Or you do find out that there is one, but it's like a different thing,
Yeah.
and they don't. Yeah. So, and it's something. It's certainly something that it makes me a lot more aware of the international audience, or the people outside the U.S. who are
Mm.
reading my work. I'm outside the U.S. myself. Is I'm certainly like very careful to limit my use of sort of idioms that are relative, that are just American specific. I'm
Mm.
sure I do. I think idioms and these expressions can be really powerful. I think that it's fun to like play with them and see if you can just, I love how you can just take an expression that's really well known, and for that audience who understands that expression, you can like change one word and like suddenly you've just created this very sticky idea. I love that. I find that really interesting. But yeah, it's certainly it gives you a lot more appreciation of language, especially as somebody who's not natively a writer. I'm now a lot more careful about like, well, where does that word come from? Like the other day, I was trying to figure out, why is compulsory something that like an authority is telling you to do, but compulsive is something that like is that you cannot help but do. And I was looking up the etymology of these and the word origin, and I was like, that's not, it wasn't very satisfying actually. It was a little bit like, oh, it sounds like it just became, people just started using it wrong someday.
That happens.
And now that's the thing that it works. Now that's what it means. It's like, if I could find a better word, I would do it. But it's sometimes you're able to do that, and so it's fun. It's like I think it's a more productive way of engaging with words than playing Wordle.
I love Wordle, though, which reminds me I have to play today's Wordle. I think I've played for around 300 days on a trot.
Oh, you have?
Yeah,
Wow.
I have. I've gotten, I think a couple of times I've gotten it right on the first guess. Quite often I've gotten on the second one. But yes, it's a fun game to play.
I opened it up. I checked it out just to know what people were talking about.
Yeah.
It was fun enough, but like, I'll beat myself up too much if I spend time doing it.
Yes, I think the most I've spent time on a Wordle is half an hour before I just gave up and just typed the same guess so that I can find out. I think it's more of a compulsive thing that you have to know the answer, that sort of a thing.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is how I use what I call Crumb time. I'm calling it Crumb time. I don't know if that's going to be the final thing, but I like that expression. It's like, because it's crumbs are of unspecific size and shape, and you have these pockets of time that are of non-specific size and shape where you don't really know how long this is going to take. You're distracted. You don't feel like you can really get into something, and so you play Wordle, you look at Twitter, you do whatever. And so I've been trying to think of ways to like use my Crumb time in a way that's as intellectually engaging or interesting as being on Twitter or playing Wordle, but that somehow drive things that I'm working on forward. And so
there is something that I tend to do. In fact, I did it just this evening. So whenever I'm cooking, I've got this half an hour, 45 minutes where I have to get the ingredients, chop them out, cook, eat. So usually when I'm in the process of cooking, I would go live on Instagram. I would just put my iPad somewhere around my kitchen, go live on Instagram, and the audience is oftentimes so engaging. They ask such absurd questions that you can just like, I would be slicing a vegetable and there was someone who would pop up and be like, there is this softbox in the background and it's blinking. Why is it blinking? And it just sends you in a stage where you just stop and wonder, okay, this question is really absurd. And I just stop there for a second and think about, I don't know, it just takes me in a very different chain of thought, which I would not have if I was just cooking and not having an engagement with my audience. So I tend to do these kind of things in those. I like the expression Crumb time.
Oh, that's interesting. I would like to check that out if I had Instagram on my phone. Next time I install it, I'm gonna have to check that out.
I think it's also a great way for. So my primary job is, let's say, being a YouTuber or making videos on the internet.
Yeah, you do a lot of live stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting for me to have that engagement with the audience on a one-on-one basis as often as I can. I mean,
I'd like to try. Yeah, I'd like to experiment with a little bit of that. I really haven't taken advantage of video a whole lot. I mean, I think in part just because it was just so hard to even talk for the longest amount of time to like make sense on, say, a podcast. And now I've done it enough where I feel like I can maybe do that on camera and as well as on audio. Because I think it's just like some people are just naturals at it.
Yeah, some people are naturals at it, but I think it's also a matter of practice. I mean, you are a person who has got a lot of
Mm-hmm.
systems in place. I'm sure you can figure something out to have that established as well. I do have a couple more
Yeah,
questions that I want to ask you. If I'm not
sure.
wrong, you are what I would like to call a self-published author, if that is a term that gets used around in your area.
Yeah, I think that that's accurate. I had traditionally published Design for Hackers, and then
Hmm.
all my other books. I've got two full length, and then a handful of shorter ones. Those are all self published.
So why that particular direction, if I may ask?
Well, I Design for Hackers. That book deal just sort of fell in my lap.
Hmm.
I was trying to get a speaking panel at South by Southwest,
Hmm.
and since I didn't have a huge following, I decided that I would write just the best article I could possibly write on the topic and direct people to the panel picker where they could vote for it. And I put it on Hacker News. I was fairly good at getting at the top of Hacker News at that
Nice.
point in time. Can't do it anymore. and and so I didn't get my speaking panel, but I got emails from two different publishers asking me if I wanted to publish a book, which, by the way, I ended up speaking at South by Southwest because of the book two times.
So things do work out. In a
It did.
weird
It
way
did
of
work
working
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that happened. Design for Hackers was very popular, and I started dabbling with this road that everybody seemed to be trying to push me down, which was, hey, you can make a bundle of money selling online courses and being this design guy and just juicing the hell out of this Design for Hackers thing.
True.
And I messed around with that a little bit, did some online courses, traveled around, spoke all over the world. That was a wonderful, exciting time in my life. But I still craved to kind of go down to write another book. And I wasn't exactly sure of the topic yet. And I worked on some, I just said, well, I don't know if Wiley, my original publisher, would be right. I'm going to be kind of changing genres here. I'm going to go from a technology book to doing a self-help book, which I don't even think I even knew that at the time, but I knew that it was different.
Yeah.
And I wrote a book proposal, found agents and stuff, emailed agents. I at least got responses from them, but they were kind of lukewarm about it. The few that I didn't go for like 40 rejections or something like that. And I was getting frustrated with it. And I was talking to Seth Godin. He was on my podcast, episode 77 and 177. So this is episode 77, I think it was. And he just stopped me at one point and was like, hey, well, you should self-publish because, you know, you're going to have to be marketing your book anyway. And a publisher, they want to publish somebody who can sell books. How do you learn how to sell books? You publish a book a week on Kindle.
Yeah.
And that got me to go ahead and self-publish finally. And I guess I came to realize, like, I got really, really lucky with the Design for Hackers thing, that it's very hard to get people that interested in what you're working on. And I still think to this day, I haven't been able to match that with the Mind Management, Not Time Management, or The Hard to Start, the other things. Even though those books have sold more.
I would like to respectfully disagree because those are very different genres of books, and the Design for Hackers is something that has a very different audience than, let's say, the other one has. So I wouldn't discredit you for that.
Yeah, and Design for Hackers, I think, has been pirated a lot, which I mean, I think can be attributed to, in part, to the subject matter. Yeah. And the people who are interested in the subject matter. It says hackers right in the title.
Yeah, it has hackers right in the title. It's bound to get pirated.
Which at the time it was sort of a
bummer.
You know, hackers going to go either one of these two ways, and I sort of thought it was going to go the creative entrepreneur way, not so much the. Anyway, so. yeah, and so I like to just be in control of things and do things my own way, and I hate
Mm,
asking for permission, and I hate writing book proposals.
yeah.
And so it's been a really wonderful process. I've enjoyed self-publishing a lot. It's been quite a jungle. There's a lot to learn,
Mm,
but now I know how to do it and know how to do a decent job at it. So I'm continuing to do it.
mm,
If some traditional publisher comes along and says, we're going to give you $500,000 for this book that you've already published, for example, that would be a total no-brainer. If it was $500,000 for a book that I hadn't published
mm.
yet, that would give me pause
Oh.
because I'd be worried about what level of control they would want
Mm.
over it, etc. But I'm having a great time self-publishing, and it's going decently well. I've been selling my own foreign rights deals and things like that, so I don't have any regrets.
I think you just had something with Amazon as well, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, Amazon occasionally chooses one of my books for a Kindle daily deal or Kindle monthly
Mm.
deal, Kindle weekly deal, and stuff. So I had one in the U.S. Where they chose it for a Kindle monthly deal, and I sold a couple thousand books, I think, that
That's good.
month, and
Mm.
yeah, it's pretty good. And so Mind Management, Not Time Management, hasn't been out for 2 years now, and I'm over 15,000 copies sold of that, and 25,000 of The Heart to Start. Those aren't Stephen King numbers. Those aren't James
But
Clear numbers. They're actually orders of magnitude lower, but but way better than most authors are lucky enough to do. So
I think another way to look at it would be that you've managed to, let's say, create a community of sorts of readers that are particularly interested in what you have to say. That can be either through your podcast or your newsletter or even your books. And I think
mm-hmm.
I would consider it to be more of a success than even the most mainstream of writers, because some at beyond a certain critical scale, you sell more just because it has your name on it, not because of what is actually written or what the subject matter is. So as long as you're selling books because of what is written or because of what you're trying to convey to the audience, I think it's a pretty huge success.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm glad that I'm making enough money to live in South America doing it. I do hope that, I hope that the snowball continues to grow. I think that it will. I think if I finish the third book in the Getting Art Done
Mm.
trilogy, I think that that's going to bring things to another level. I've got lots of other ways that I'd like to explore creatively after that I'm dabbling in at the moment, and can't wait to kind of get the third book out of the way. But I still want to do a great job with it. And yeah, I certainly feel successful with it. I don't feel interested in a lot of the traditionally published books that are out there in my genre.
Mm.
Honestly, I just don't. I'm not. They don't interest me, and I can and I don't know how to relate necessarily to your like sort of typical mass market person. I think, and
Mm.
and that's okay. It's fun.
I would agree. I think it's also okay. I have one final question before our time sort of is up.
And by the way, I've got the batteries. I've got some time. So if you want a little extra time, you go for it. But you also have to go to bed eventually, I
I
think.
mean, I don't have anywhere to go. One of the things that us authors and YouTubers can do is that we can, let's say, not have we don't have to wake up at 10 in the morning and go somewhere. So that is something. Oh yeah. So the
Yeah.
line of thought that I was trying to communicate was, I think it's a liberty that authors and writers are in a unique position to have, which is you do not have to work and expect results immediately. Like I know it takes a
No, you
long
shouldn't.
time to write a book, and if you were, let's say, in a traditional job, you would want to have results or returns coming out of throughout the quarter. So you have to measure it every single quarter or every single month, every single week. Whereas in aspects of creative work, let's say specifically writing a book, it can be years before you put a book out, and it takes that time and effort. And I think that provides a certain sense of comfort, which means that, okay, that there is time that you can take to perfect or hone your craft. I think that is a unique sort of a luxury that not many people get to experience.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Mark Manson has talked about how when subtle art took off and he just became like pretty depressed,
Yeah.
because he thought that, I'm going to struggle
Yeah.
for this goal my entire life, and here it was, he had achieved it, and now where was he going to find meaning in his life? I think he eventually figured that out, and then as far as success goes and the evaluation of your own success, I was been learning about Richard Bachman recently. I don't know if you know who Richard Bachman is, but he was a first-time author in 1977, and his publisher was quite interested to publish his first book, but Bachman said, "I've got these terms. I want the minimum amount of marketing for my books. I want them to be like the sort of bargain bin paper, just straight to paperback. They're going to be in truck stops and drugstores, etc. I'm not available for interviews, and so just minimum amount of fanfare for my books." Well, they kept publishing his books, and actually his fifth book did decently well. His fifth book sold about 28,000 copies. But there was something peculiar about Richard Bachman's writing style, and it made people kind of suspicious. And there was this one book clerk in Washington, D.C. He went to the Library of Congress, and he started looking up the copyright forms of these things, and he saw on there on one of the books that on the copyright form there was Stephen King.
Oh yeah, that is where the
right. There's Stephen, and on some other copyright forms was Stephen King's agent. And it confirmed the suspicion that had been sort of floating around the thriller author world. Like, Richard Bachman was Stephen King. Now, what happened with Richard Bachman's books after people found out they were Stephen King's books? They actually, of course, they sold, instead of selling 28,000, it was 280,000. And somebody had optioned one of the Richard Bachman books, The Running Man, for a screenplay, and they were quite excited to find out that they actually had a Stephen King story, and they had actually paid a decent amount, and were like, "Why is this cost so much?" And so now it sounds like an open shut case. It sounds like, well, I mean, he sold 10 times as much as Stephen King. Like, obviously, because why did Stephen King do this? One of the reasons was his publisher had this sort of superstitious belief that, like, if he published more than one book in a year, that it would just ruin his career. And it speaks something about how their level of conviction in that belief, that they allowed him to publish these books with minimal marketing presence. So he where was I at there? So he I really lost my train of thought there.
Measuring your own sense of success.
Yeah, what was it? So one of the reasons he did this was because he the publisher didn't want him to publish more than one book in a year. And the other reason, he said, well, while I'm at this, I might as well run a little experiment. Let's see if we can stack the dice against Richard Bachman and see how he does. And, maybe it's reverse rationalization, but he actually doesn't feel that he really got a good answer to his question of how much of this was luck and how much of this was skill. Even after 7 years, even after 5 books, getting to 28,000 copies is pretty good. Yeah. And Richard Bachman's next book was going to be Misery. And Misery was a hit. And I mean, it was a hit because it was by Stephen King. Yeah, but it could have happened. And this is the way to evaluate success in creative work. Is that sometimes things take a really long time to work. The Queen's Gambit was a 1983 book. Screenplay rights got sold, and then they were going to make the movie, and then the author died, and then they canceled the project. Screenplay rights got sold again in 1992 by the widow of the author, and they were going to make the movie. 2007 comes along. They're going to make the movie. The director dies. The director was Heath Ledger.
Yeah.
And then 13 more years pass, and it comes out on Netflix and becomes a New York Times bestseller. It took 37 years for this book to become a runaway hit bestseller. And you just can't evaluate it as how did today's outcome turn out, which is always something to keep in mind, that I keep in mind myself as I'm, say, sharing ideas on Twitter. How did this idea do? That tells me something, but if it's a hill that I want to die on, then I need to keep pounding that drum and maybe finding a more interesting way to say what I'm trying to say and things like that.
So do you think that is the reason behind this? Is it persistence? Is it conviction? Is it just sheer I wouldn't call it luck, or just the sheer persistence, or
I think it's sheer luck. No, it's not sheer luck, but it's a tremendous part of it. And I think that if you don't, I don't know, I'm sure that a lot of people who have been very successful in creative work think that it's all because of their skill, but I think you just have to accept that a lot of it's luck. There's the most famous saying in Hollywood is nobody knows anything. Is that there could be a movie that's going to come out, and like Raiders of the Lost Ark, nobody wanted to make it, and it was huge. It was Indiana Jones. Meantime, there was another movie that everybody was excited about, didn't turn out to be anything, and the ones that do really, really, I mean, you see it in authorship. I'm a pretty successful author. Okay, I've sold getting close to 100,000 books, maybe 75,000 books, something like that. Yeah. What Mark Manson's one book sold more than 10 million copies, right? Yeah. There's a huge, there's many orders of magnitude difference between mild success and wild success. And I think it's frustrating to think of it as random, to think of it as luck, is think of it as this thing that you don't have a lot of control over. But I think that there's a solution to that, and that's what Nassim Taleb talks about so much when he talks about the barbell strategy. So creative work happens in extremistan, which is extreme, like randomness, up and down variability, versus mediocristan, which is our regular world where you go get a job at Starbucks and you make this hourly wage, and you're making that over and over, and over time your earnings accumulate, rather than just flat line of nothing for a long time and then a hockey stick showing up. And so the barbell strategy is really just trying to stay in the game, trying to give yourself as many poker hands to play as you possibly can. I have a friend who's a professional poker player. Oh, nice. When he goes to a tournament in Vegas, they've got what's called the bankroll. You got to have a certain bankroll if you want to make it, because no matter how good you are at poker, you're going to be unlucky at times. Yeah. And so you have to have that bankroll to be able to withstand that bad luck and keep yourself in the game. Just don't go bust. I
think it's a lot of persistence, yes. With the luck.
And this is something that it's very easy to get caught up in this sort of defeatist attitude about, when you see somebody achieving something and think, well, they have this, I don't have that, etc. And there's truth to that most of the time, which is what makes it so dangerous. But one of the things that people will say often is survivorship bias. Well, there's a bunch of people who tried that same thing and it didn't work out. Yeah. Well, that's the wrong.
A bunch of times, yes.
Yeah, and that's a fundamental misunderstanding about how this works, because survivorship bias was extremely valuable when Abraham Wald used it for when planes were getting shot down in World War II, and he said, well, let's armor the planes in the parts that don't have bullet holes on them. Well, why would you do that? Because the parts that don't have bullet holes on them are the parts that the planes that didn't come back got shot on, right? And that's survivorship bias at work, and it's extremely valuable in a case like that where it's do or die. If Russian roulette was a professional sport, there would be a Michael Jordan. There would be thank God it's not, but there would be a Michael Jordan of Russian roulette. There would be somebody who was just like totally awesome at Russian roulette, has done all these matches of Russian roulette, has never blown his own head off. And there would be like sports analysis going like, oh yeah, he's got this technique. And then there would be books about like, oh, this is how you play Russian roulette. And there would be like special gloves for playing Russian roulette. And it would have like his logo on it and everything. Like it would totally, but Russian roulette is do or die. You win Russian roulette or you lose and you're done. Yeah. So the secret to making it in creative work, I think, is to just make sure that you stay in the game. And that's where you take whatever you can do to keep yourself in the game, but then you have that little bit where you're just trying the wildest, stupidest, most nonsense ideas that you can possibly think of, because you can never predict what's going to happen with them. And those are the ideas that can be, there's asymmetric opportunities, right? That doesn't take a lot of investment, but it's huge. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Two guys sitting in their apartment together, sketching things, and one of them draws a Ninja Turtle. The other thinks, that's hilarious. He draws some Ninja Turtles. They go back and forth a little bit. They're just laughing. They're having a great time. One says, this is the dumbest thing ever.
I mean, to be fair, it is.
And but then they scrape together a couple $1,000. They self-published the first issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's $1 billion. They sold $1 billion in toys in 4 years. That's just the toys. They made movies and series and all these comic books, etc. Off this crazy little idea that was just the dumbest thing ever.
I think what people also often fail to misunderstand or rather ignore is they often compare or want to achieve just the wildest of successes without sort of understanding that even a mild success is better than no success at all. I think most people that I've met in this creative space, in the space that I am working in, or the kind of creators that I meet, they often tend to just look at the absolute outlier of success and they want to replicate that. And I want to be the next outlier. I think the understanding that I have is that even the outlier did not know or plan to be that outlier. That outlier just...
It's a black swan.
Yeah. That outlier just intended to do what made sense to them at the moment. And now there are people who are again writing books about how this person achieved that level of success. And everyone is just trying to follow that same bandwagon.
The professional Russian roulette players. No.
Yes.
Yeah, there's another... Nassim Taleb is a great person to just read his books. And they can be a little bit difficult to,
that is exactly
to digest sometimes and like to get the ideas out. But he talks about all this is like black swans. Like we don't... These things that are successful, we try to make up some sort of story about how they became successful, or this is why it worked, but we don't know. We don't actually know. And so you just have to like do things that don't make sense that maybe have a chance of working. And then this idea of between like a mild success being better than a wild success, I don't know. I think it is to the extent that it keeps you in the game. But it also depends upon like how many opportunities, how many rolls of the dice are you going to get? I think somebody like Nick Kokonis, who I've interviewed on the podcast, he's a restaurateur and built a restaurant reservation system called Talk. And he has built some restaurants with Grant Achatz, who is one of the best chefs in the world. And he was talking about how they opened up this one restaurant and they had the upstairs and they had the downstairs to the restaurant. And people kept coming in and they were like, oh, can we sit upstairs? And they realized like, oh, nobody wants to sit downstairs at this place. And he said, well, it was doing okay, but we just tore down this, was it a $250,000 build out or a $40,000? Like it was a decent amount of money that they just like tore out the bottom and they made it a different restaurant that had like it was more of a speakeasy theme because it was in the basement and it became a place that people want to go for that type of environment. And he was saying, like it was doing okay. And that's why people think the restaurant business is so difficult. Oh, it's got such thin margins or whatever, because they're afraid of the wild success. They want the middling success, he says. And that's the thing that, like, I think the middling success is useful for keeping you in the game, maybe building some skills and things like that. But ultimately, if you're interested in wild success, you got to take some chances where it doesn't feel like it's going to be a mild success. And I think Nassim Taleb, when he talks about the barbell strategy, one of the reasons why the barbell, by the way, people who aren't familiar with this, is one side is a big weight, and that's your sure bets. That's like, this is going to keep you in the game. This is going to keep you secure. The other side is your wild cards. It's like 85%, 15%. In an investing context, I'm not a financial advisor, yada, yada, yada. And so in an investing context, he's like, okay, so on one side, you've got gold and whatever things are not going to go down, getting harder and harder. And the other side is like options. So the way that Nassim Taleb made a bunch of money was he was buying these options, as I understand it, that would like make him a ton of money if like a once in decades, drop in the market occurred. And apparently those are really underpriced options because nobody is taking those bets. And so we made a ton of money during the 87 crash. And so the thing that he would say, or I think he says in one of his books, like in an investing context, they often say, well, yeah, just buy an S&P 500 mutual fund or ETF or something. It's just a mix of the market. The market represents the market as a whole. And, over time it goes up 7% every year, et cetera. And he says, well, but the market went down 90% during the Great Depression. So if you had been in something secure, you still have your 85%, but you're making these little bets with your 15%. Maybe you bought Bitcoin and it went up 100x or something like that, and you don't end up losing, right? So keeping in the game. And so I think that the mild success is good to have if it keeps you in the game, and it's something that I'm often looking out for myself. Is, ooh, am I doing something that's too safe? Like once I get above a certain level, am I doing something that's too safe? What can I do that's like a little scarier, that I'm not quite sure is going to work, that I kind of like am afraid to do? I try to make some room for that.
I think that's a very interesting way to approach this. Then, I mean, for you individually, but if you're constantly, let's say, it's stopping you from plateauing in whatever you're exploring out for. If there is a certain level of stability that you have achieved, your instinct then goes on to figure out the next experiment of sorts that you can run. I think that's very interesting.
And that's my entire business model, really, is when I started on my own, I started with, okay, well, what's the minimum amount that I can do freelance work? I moved to Chicago, freelancing for clients in Silicon Valley, charging a higher rate than the place I was living. What's the minimum amount of work of freelance that I can do each week and still get by? 10 hours. Okay, that was my goal. 10 hours a week of freelance. So I did that for a while. And so with the rest of the time, I want to build some passive revenue. So I built some passive revenue stuff. And then with the rest of the time, I was like just experimenting with stuff. So passive revenue went up. Then I got a book deal. got to work on the book. And now I've parlayed that book deal into writing some more books. And now I'm finally like getting to the point after 15 years. So maybe it's not good advice. I don't know. But after 15 years where I'm like, okay, like I like what I'm doing. The passive revenue stuff, like it was money, but I wasn't like, oh, this means something to me. But I like what I'm doing. I like the work that I'm doing, and I'm making a decent amount of money. But now I'm like thinking about the next thing. Okay, well, I can't write about productivity, creative productivity for the rest of my life, I should actually create some things besides books about creative productivity, right? So I'm thinking about those things now, but got to get a little bit more of that out of the way. But I'm really that's my process. Is once I reach a certain level of security, I want to play.
I think just for that it is good advice, because most people do not have that tendency, if I'll be very honest. Most people just want a certain sense of security in their life without
Oh,
having to
life
look
gets in the
out.
way, yeah.
Yeah, without having
Life
to look out.
changes, people have kids and stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah.
So I can totally understand that, but I mean, I don't have kids.
Mhm.
Why don't I have kids? Well, one of the reasons is because I want to be free to do these things.
Yeah,
I
so
don't want to have
people
to
that
think about that.
resonate with your temperament of having to try out new things, I think for them it is great advice. For example, I
It
resonate with that
depends what you want to.
100%. I want to be having this freedom of exploring certain opportunities or exploring things that interest me throughout my life. So for me,
Yeah.
it's good advice, and I can try it for 15 years and maybe things will work out.
Though I've also heard that it has the opposite effect. Somebody has kids and they start making a ton of money, but I don't know what.
I think it's a very individualistic case by case basis that you have to decide for yourself. But I think in our
And
general sense, it
unfortunately,
would
you
be
can't try it out.
yes. Yeah. I mean that's just life. Some things work out, some things
Yeah,
don't. I have one final question before
sure.
we sort of head off, which is in your experience of writing this, doing this for however many years, how have you personally seen the interest towards reading in particular change or not change at all? Because from what I have seen, my peers, they do not read books. Even
Hmm.
if they do it. Most of my peers don't. Most of my school friends don't. Even most of my college friends don't. When they do read it, it is mostly to signal a in the social sense that okay, this is a particular book that I've read. They do not
Hmm.
remember
Interesting.
anything of it. They don't get any sort of value from it. Reading has become a sort of a signal that okay, I am probably something interesting. Is that the experience that you have had, or what is your thought around people who are generally around reading?
I don't feel like I've observed or know enough to know whether there's more reading going on or less. I mean, I'm still selling books.
Mm.
I think it is surprising, given say like the number of books I sell, which I think is a decent amount,
Mm.
that my social media followings don't increase
Mm.
as I sell more books.
Mm.
So I think that maybe it might tell you something, that maybe some of the people who are reading
Reading and
books
not on social
are
media. Yeah,
they're not on
that's true.
social
That's true.
media, right? Yeah. And as far as signaling something or reading being this sort of fashion thing, I do think that's true, and I think that maybe one of the things that kind of turns me off about a lot of
Mm.
the
The
sort of
mainstream.
major publisher self-help books that are out
Yeah.
there, or somebody in a more denigrating way, I've heard some of them called midwit books,
I think one of my
which is funny.
friend, either this was a friend or I heard it somewhere. Most self-help books could have been essays.
Yeah. And if I'm honest, like I can't I write books that I write my books for me, but I also feel like I'm not smart enough to write the books that I read.
I mean, it's a good place to be at. You're always looking up. You'll always have
Maybe it's a good place to
something
be.
good to aspire to. Yeah.
Right, I aspire to write books that are as good, or are as smart as the ones that I read, or at least
Mm.
that's the way I think about it anyway. And I don't know. I feel like books are never going to die. I feel like they have this archetypal presence
Mm.
in the mind, that there's almost this primitive idea of here's a package that has ideas in
I
it.
agree.
It has the idea. And I think that we as humans are just so attracted to information,
Mm.
and we're so attracted to, oh, like there's a secret in here. Wait,
Hidden unlock.
what's that glow going on with our neighbors, and why do they have the deer above the glow? Oh, they're
Yeah.
cooking meat. Oh,
Mm.
wait, where do they go at night? I don't see them out sleeping in trees.
Mm.
It's like, oh, did they go into a cave?
Mm.
What's that about? Are they built a hut? Like, what? I want to know.
Yeah. That's true.
Here's the book. It's the idea.
Yeah.
And uh, the social media is great, and
Mm.
it's terrible.
Mm.
And I hope that it will blow over. And there's still people who read books, and those are my people. And
Yeah, I think that
I
is a
think that
good
we'll
way to
be
look at it.
okay.
I think that's a good way to look at it. So it's something that I do. I do tend to do most of my reading on my electronic devices, mostly on my
Hmm.
Kindle. But if there is a book that I particularly like, I would then order a physical
Yeah.
copy, and then that would go to my hometown and be in my library over there with me and my father. We share sort of a room where he has his old books that he has read, and I have my books that I have read.
Oh, cool.
So we do that sort of a thing. Which
That's
asks,
great.
yeah. So I have another question that just came up, which is, how much time do you actually spend consuming rather than writing? Like reading,
Um,
watching, anything.
I would say probably a couple hours a day.
Mm.
On Mondays, as I said, it's I don't consume content by anybody but myself.
Mm.
These days, or at least last few weeks, until maybe about 9 p.m.
Mm.
Then I can read and get myself ready for bed.
Mm.
I'm always trying to make it a larger section of my time to be reading and engaging with ideas, but I think it's probably a couple hours a day.
Mm.
I try to make better use of that Crumb time, uh, not going to social media. And now when I have that time, my phone it can't do very much else. So I have like what I call like my Crumb time list, which is basically maybe things that I'm doing what I call curiosity management,
Mm.
which is an idea that I'm working on, which is that if I'm curious about something and there's different levels of curiosity,
Mm.
there's being very curious in it about it, and I want to read the book. I know I want to read the book. I that's compulsive curiosity.
Yeah.
And then there's cursory curiosity, which is like, oh, I don't know that much about Marie Curie.
Mm.
I should read the Wikipedia page for Marie Curie and see if I want to read a book
Yeah.
about her. And so then that'll be in my Crumb time list. And then there's compulsory curiosity, which is like, what the hell is TikTok? Like what's this Wordle thing
Yeah.
that I keep hearing about? I feel like I should know about it. And then and so and so they'll be on my Crumb time list. And so when I have
Mm.
those little pockets of time, that Crumb time, then I'll open up the Wikipedia page for Marie Curie and I'll read it, or I'll download the Wordle app and I'll play with it for a little bit, or depends upon how much time I have and stuff. So I'm trying to get to where it's not all just am I sitting and reading and moving my eyes over things. In addition to, of course, I've got a Zettelkasten, which I've written about,
Yeah.
digital Zettelkasten, where I'm taking notes on things, where
Oh,
I
I.
export the highlights, and then I can. It's one of my Crumb time activities is just look through the highlights on a book and highlight the highlights and see which parts are interesting, and just
I.
try to engage more deeply and intentionally with other people's ideas. But a couple hours a day.
I tried using Obsidian. I think that is the software that is
Yeah, I
based
love
on
that.
that method. I could not make sense of it. It is just too complicated for my puny little brain to make sense of all of this information floating around. But again,
Takes some
I'll,
getting used to.
so I'll probably give it a shot sometime in the future, in times to come. So what are the things that you do? Let's say for when you're not consuming intentionally, something that is sort of your guilty pleasure of sorts.
Um, I play golf.
Oh, that's interesting.
Um, Now I always seem to have to turn everything into work, so it's actually a work project. It's a writing project.
Mm.
I loved to play golf when I was younger, and then I didn't play for 15 years.
Mm.
In part, just I couldn't make it an important part of my life. I didn't have the money,
Mm.
and so I loved it, but realized I wasn't talented at it. So I decided, oh, I'm gonna try to get good at it and write about it. So 90 to 70 on Twitter is golf. Something that I also really love to do, I don't do it as much as I would like to. I should probably do it more, is bachata dancing,
Oh,
which is a
I'm aware.
related to salsa.
Yeah.
And I've traveled to bachata conferences to dance. I guess the pandemic kind of put a damper on some of that. So I love dancing, and there's no work. I thought about how can I make this a part of my life and make it more of a work thing for me, but no, there's no work
I think
involvement with that.
certain parts of life should not be about work.
Oh,
Maybe
you're
dancing.
probably right. You're probably right, but I love dancing.
Mm,
Social dancing is a wonderful thing. I think that the world would be a much better place if more people did some type of social dance.
mm. I think I'm gonna book my gym has these group dance lessons. I've never booked one. I've always wanted to. I think this is a sign that I should book
Oh,
one for tomorrow morning.
awesome.
That would be
It
fun.
takes a little, you got to get over a hump. You got to get certain,
Yeah, yes, I'm horrible at dancing.
especially as a lead, you have to have a certain thick skin because you got to get to a, you have to like, you have to, it's like catch 22. You've got to like, you got to be good enough to dance for somebody to want to dance with you. But for somebody to want to dance with you, you have to be good enough to dance.
Yeah. I'm gonna try it out for a week or two and just be at the back and figure out what is happening and see if I like it or
Mm-hmm.
not. But sure, I will give it a shot. But I think
Oh,
that's
it's
about
wonderful.
it. That's all I have for you, David. If there's anything else that you would want to ask me or any thoughts that you have, otherwise it's been lovely spending the last 1.5 quarter to 2 hours with you. I just had a lot of fun.
I had a lot of fun too. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor, and and I appreciate it.
Again, thank you for taking out the time. I know you've been really busy, but thank you for taking out the 2 hours. It was lovely. I just had a lot of fun, and I will now get on to booking a dance class and figuring out how to make sense of the outline that I've drafted for my book.
Well, get some sleep too. I know it's late for you.
Oh, yeah, it's about what time is it? It's 2 in the morning. So yes, I'm definitely gonna go and sleep. I'm just going to stop record.